Welcome to the Pro Ticker Deep Dive.
Hey, it's great to be here.
So today is Friday, February 20th, 2026, and I want to start by just setting the scene a bit for you, because if you've been paying attention to the financial news this week,
Right.
and then, comparing it to your actual everyday life, you might feel like you're losing your mind a little bit.
Yeah, you're definitely feeling the dissonance right now.
Exactly. It's like on one hand, you open up your brokerage app on your phone, and it is an absolute party.
Oh yeah.
The Dow is over 50,000. The S&P crossed 7,000. Everyone on the financial networks is just smiling ear to ear.
Popping champagne.
Right. But then you close the app, you get in your car, you drive down to the local grocery store, and you're standing there looking at, I don't know, a bag of coffee or a carton of eggs,
Yeah.
and you just feel this physical knot in your stomach
Yeah.
because the prices are just, they're wild. It really feels like two completely different realities are somehow coexisting in the exact same timeline right now.
Well, that's because structurally speaking, they are.
Yeah.
Yeah. We are living through a moment of just profound economic paradox right now.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at the top line numbers, the stuff that politicians like to tweet about.
Sure, the highlights.
Exactly. Things look pretty resilient. Consumer sentiment just hit a 6-month high. The markets are flirting with all-time records. But if you scratch the surface even a little bit, the picture just fractures immediately.
Which is what we've been calling the split screen economy.
That is the perfect metaphor for it. It really is a split screen. On the left side of the screen, you have the financial economy.
Right.
So that's your asset prices, the whole AI stock boom, corporate earnings. And that side is booning. It's doing incredibly well.
And then on the right side.
On the right side, you have the physical economy. Wages, grocery bills, the cost of rent, the cost of borrowing money to buy a car. And that side is genuinely painful for a lot of people.
And our mission for this deep dive today is to really try to reconcile those two screens for you. We aren't just going to sit here and read you a list of report numbers.
No, that would be incredibly boring.
Right. We want to unpack why the economy feels so wildly different depending on who you are, and maybe more importantly, where your money is parked.
Exactly.
We've got a massive stack of data to get through today. Everything from the latest consumer sentiment numbers to, frankly, terrifying budget outlook to some really critical analysis on these new trade policies that are basically reshaping how much we pay for absolutely everything.
Yeah, we have 4 main pillars we need to cover to really make sense of all this. First, we need to dissect this psychological floor in consumer sentiment.
The fact that people are feeling better on paper.
Right. Why are they feeling better on
Yeah.
paper? But historically speaking, the numbers are still just terrible.
Yeah.
Second, we're going to do a deep forensic audit of the invisible tax of 2026.
The tariffs.
The tariffs. We are talking about a $1,300 annual bite out of the average household budget right now.
I really want to flag that number right out of the gate for you. $1,300.
It's massive.
That isn't a rounding error. That's a mortgage payment for some people. Or a family vacation. Or a year of car insurance. That is real, tangible money coming out of your pocket.
It's incredibly significant. And then for our third pillar, we have to look at the central bank's standoff.
The Federal Reserve.
Right. They paused their rate cuts in January, but it wasn't unanimous.
Which is rare.
Very rare. There is some real ideological drama happening behind closed doors over there. They're basically arguing over whether to save the dollar's purchasing power or save the job market.
And you can't really do both right now.
Not easily, no.
Yeah.
And finally, we'll look at the energy wildcard. Gas is cheap right now. Surprisingly cheap, actually. But there's a geopolitical chess match involving Iran and the Strait of Hormuz that could flip that picture literally overnight.
Okay, so there's a lot to get through. Let's start with that headline number that kind of sparked all the debate this past week. The Consumer Sentiment Index for February 2026.
Yeah.
Give us the actual number first, and then let's break down what it actually means for you and me.
So the final number came in at 56.6. Now, context is everything here, obviously. That 56.6 is up slightly from January, which was 56.4. So it's at technically the highest level we've seen since August of 2025.
Okay, so let me play devil's advocate for a second. If I'm sitting in the administration right now, I'm absolutely framing this as momentum.
Oh, 100%.
I'm putting out a press release saying highest consumer confidence in 6 months, because that sounds like a recovery.
It sounds great. It sounds like momentum until you zoom out and look at the historical timeline. Yeah. You really have to look at the percentiles here to get the real story.
Okay, lay it on me.
Historically speaking, a reading of 56.6 places us in the 3rd percentile of history.
The third percentile.
Yes, meaning that 97% of the time, since they started tracking this data decades and decades ago, Americans have felt better about the economy than they do right this very second.
Wow. Okay, that really puts a damper on the party.
It does.
We're all cheering because we finally climbed out of the sub-basement, but we're basically still standing waist deep in the sewer.
That's essentially it. It's not a recovery. It's a stabilization, but at a very, very low level.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't panicking quite as much as they were a few months ago, maybe, but they certainly are celebrating.
And there's a specific detail in the data that shows exactly why that number even bumped up at all, right? There was a revision.
Exactly. There was a revision. The preliminary number that came out earlier in the month was actually higher. It was 57.3.
Right, I remember seeing that.
But then they revised it down to 56.6 for the final read. And the reason why is fascinating. Right in the middle of the month, we had that big tech sell-off.
The wobble in the AI trade.
Yes, the AI trade wobbled. NVIDIA took a little bit of a hit. The NASDAQ pulled back a few percentage points.
Mm-hmm.
And almost immediately, consumer sentiment dropped.
So this brings us right back to that split screen idea. Because why on earth does a tech sell-off impact consumer sentiment so directly for the average person?
Oh, that's the thing. Does it impact the average person?
Yeah.
The revision tells us exactly who is actually moving the needle on these surveys. In 2026, this entire rise in sentiment, this whole bump to a 6-month high, is almost exclusively driven by people with large stock portfolios.
Okay.
If you have a 401k that's heavily weighted in big tech, or if you're holding a lot of the S&P 500, you are watching your net worth hit all-time highs week after week.
You feel great.
You feel incredibly wealthy. It's the classic wealth effect in action.
Let's actually define that for a second. The wealth effect. It's a term economists throw around constantly, but how does that actually play out for someone sitting at their kitchen table?
It's a psychological phenomenon, mostly, but it has very real-world economic consequences. Basically, when the value of your assets goes up, so your house appreciates or your stock portfolio balloons, you feel much more financially secure.
Even if your actual paycheck hasn't changed.
Exactly. You might not have a single extra dollar of cash in your checking account today compared to last year, but you log in, you see your retirement account is up 30%, and you know you're quote-unquote worth more. So because you feel wealthier, you change your behavior. You might go ahead and book that summer vacation. You might buy the slightly nicer bottle of wine at the store.
You don't stress as much about the price of eggs.
Precisely. You feel insulated from the daily grind of inflation because your nest egg is growing much faster than prices are rising.
But, and I think this is the critical but here, what if you don't own stocks? What if you're part of the massive chunk of the population that is basically living paycheck to paycheck?
Then the wealth effect is zero. It literally doesn't apply to you.
Right.
In fact, it might even be a negative wealth effect because you're seeing asset prices rising, you see houses getting more expensive, you hear about the stock market booming, while your own purchasing power is falling.
You feel left behind.
Completely left behind. And the data confirms this. For consumers who do not hold stock, the sentiment numbers show they're completely stagnant, or in some demographics, even more pessimistic than they were last year.
So that aggregate headline number, that 56.6, is actually kind of misleading.
Highly misleading.
It's taking the absolute euphoria of the investor class, averaging it out with the financial despair of the working class, and spitting out a number that just says, hey, things are mildly bad.
That is exactly what it's doing. It masks the bifurcation completely. But if you look at the qualitative data in the survey, it exposes the reality. They don't just ask people for a number, they ask them why they feel the way they do.
The spontaneous responses.
Yes. About 46% of consumers spontaneously mention high prices as the primary reason their personal finances are eroding.
And when you say spontaneously, you mean they weren't handed a multiple choice list to pick from?
No list. They weren't prompted.
Yeah.
The surveyor just asked, how are your finances? And 46% of people just blurted out, I'm broke because everything costs too much.
Wow.
And here's the kicker. That number, 46%, has been at that exact elevated level for 7 straight months.
7 months. So this isn't just a sudden shock anymore. People aren't just reacting to a bad week at the pump. This is a chronic condition.
It's a new baseline of pain.
You know, it really feels like a patient in the ICU. It's like the patient has been crashing, and finally they stabilize. The doctor comes out to the waiting room and says to the family, well, the good news is they aren't actively dying anymore. The vitals are flat, which is good news. You're relieved. But you walk into the room, and the patient is still in a hospital bed hooked up to machines. They definitely aren't ready to get up and run a marathon.
No.
They're still in a massive amount of pain. They just aren't actively deteriorating every single second.
That is a brilliant analogy. You aren't getting worse, but the day-to-day experience is still miserable.
So let's pivot and look at the actual source of that misery. We keep hearing about high prices from that 46% of people, but we need to talk about the root cause.
Yes, we do.
Because we aren't just dealing with inflation in the sort of abstract post-pandemic money printing sense anymore. We are dealing with specific, deliberate policy decisions in 2026.
Exactly.
We really need to talk about tariffs.
This is probably the single most critical structural change in the 2026 economy compared to, say, 2024 or 2023. We have actively moved from a relatively open global trade environment to a highly protectionist one.
Right.
And regardless of the politics behind it, we just need to be crystal clear on the economics.
Protectionism costs money.
Let's hit that headline number you mentioned earlier again, because I want it front and center for everyone listening. $1,300 per household. Walk us through exactly where that figure comes from.
So independent tax analysts looked at the new comprehensive tariff schedules that the administration has implemented over the last year. They calculated the total cost of those tariffs that eventually get passed through to the end consumer.
Right.
And when you average it out, it is a $1,300 annual hit to the average American family. To really understand how massive this policy shift is, you have to look at what's called the effective tariff rate.
Okay, let's define that. What is the difference between the headline tariff rate we hear on the news and the effective rate?
Sure. So you'll hear politicians go on TV and say, we are slapping a 10% or a 20% tariff on all foreign goods. That's the headline.
It sounds very simple.
It sounds simple, but international trade is never simple. In reality, there are always exemptions. There are loopholes. There are specific carved-out trade deals with certain allies where the rate is lower.
Okay.
So the effective rate is just the hard math of what is actually being collected at the border. You take the total tax revenue collected by customs, and you divide it by the total value of all the imports coming in.
And where does that effective number sit right now in 2026?
It has hit 9.9%.
Just shy of 10%. Is that unusually high relative to history?
It is the highest level we have seen since 1946.
1946.
Yes. We have effectively rolled back our national trade policy by 80 years. We are now operating in a trade environment that our great-grandparents would recognize, but that the modern, hyper-connected global economy was absolutely not built to handle.
I think there is a massive misconception here that we really need to take a minute to clear up. Because I hear this all the time. I hear it at family dinners. I hear it online.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
When people hear the word tariffs, the political rhetoric has convinced a lot of people that foreign countries are the ones paying. People will say, China is paying us billions of dollars, or Mexico is writing a massive check to the U.S. Treasury.
Right. That is the political rhetoric. And look, it sounds great on a bumper sticker. It sounds like a geopolitical win. But economically, mechanically, it is simply objectively false. The mechanics of a tariff are completely unambiguous.
So let's break it down mechanically. Let's trace it. When a massive container ship full of goods docks at the port in Long Beach or Newark, what physically happens with the money?
The U.S. government does not send an invoice to Beijing. They don't send a bill to the German government or a Vietnamese factory.
Sure.
Customs and Border Protection bills the importer of record.
The importer of record.
Yes. That is the U.S. company. That's the giant retailer, like Walmart or Target. It's the domestic manufacturer like Ford bringing in parts. Or, very often, it's just the small or mid-sized business distributor sitting in Ohio.
So if I'm an American business owner and I'm importing rolled steel to manufacture screws, or I'm importing consumer electronics to sell in my local shop, I am the one writing the check to the U.S. government.
You are writing the check. The foreign manufacturer already got paid for the goods. Now the goods are at the U.S. border, and before customs lets you put them on a truck, you have to pay the tariff tax out of your own company's operating capital.
So I cut the check.
Yeah.
My cash flow takes a hit.
A huge hit. And then you are faced with a really difficult choice as a business owner. You have two options. You can eat that cost yourself, which means your profit margin shrinks, maybe to the point where you aren't profitable anymore.
Right.
Or, option two, you pass that new tax cost directly onto your customer by raising the price of the screw, or the toaster, or the television.
And I'm going to assume that the vast majority of businesses are not in the business of voluntarily destroying their own profit margins, especially when all their other operational costs are going up too.
Exactly. They aren't charities. We actually have incredible data on this from banking sector analyses that really sheds light on the reality on the ground.
Yeah.
They looked at mid-size U.S. businesses,
Define mid-size for us.
companies pulling in between $10 million and $1 billion in revenue.
Okay, so these aren't the massive multinational tech giants with endless cash reserves and armies of lobbyists.
No, these are the regional distributors, the mid-tier manufacturers. These companies are the actual engine of the American economy.
And what did the data show about their tariff payments?
Their out-of-pocket tariff payments tripled over the last year.
Tripled. Oh my God. That creates an absolute nightmare for a company's cash flow.
It drains your liquidity immediately. And the research explicitly shows that these businesses are reacting in exactly 3 ways to survive this cash crunch. They are raising prices on the consumer, they're completely pausing all new hiring, or they're just eating into their margins and praying they don't go under. It is a direct, measurable transfer of wealth from American businesses and American consumers straight to the federal government.
So when we see the labor market starting to cool down, which we are definitely going to get into in a few minutes, part of that cooling is directly because companies are taking the money they would have spent on hiring new people, and they're spending it to pay these tariff taxes instead.
It is all intimately connected. You can't separate trade policy from the labor market. And the polling shows that the public actually realizes this now. The narrative has really shifted compared to a few years ago.
People are connecting the dots.
They are. I was looking at a major national poll from January. It showed that 65% of Americans now believe that tariffs make everyday items less affordable.
65%. In this political climate, you can barely get 65% of people to agree that the sky is blue.
Exactly. It wasn't just one side of the aisle. It was Republicans and Democrats alike agreeing on this.
The awareness is bipartisan because the pain at the register is universal. You really can't spin the price tag when someone is standing in the checkout line.
You cannot.
Let's look at some of the specific pain points mentioned in the recent data, because these are items that absolutely everyone buys. Let's talk about coffee.
Coffee is the perfect example here because it completely exposes the logical flaw in the pure buy American argument. Coffee prices are up 34% in the last year.
34% for a basic morning staple.
Yes. Now, why is it up that much? Look, we do have some ongoing supply chain frictions. We've had some severe weather impacts on the harvest yields down in Brazil and Colombia, so the base price was already going up.
Right.
But when you layer a massive import tariff on top of a commodity that we simply do not possess the climate to grow in the continental United States, you are absolutely guaranteeing a price hike for the consumer.
Because you can't just pivot and start a massive commercial coffee farm in Iowa.
Exactly. The whole point of a tariff is supposed to be to encourage people to buy the domestic alternative. But with coffee, there is no domestic alternative to switch to.
So we're essentially just taxing a daily habit that Americans are absolutely not going to give up, and there is no domestic workaround to avoid paying the tax.
You pay the extra 34% or you stop drinking coffee. Those are your only choices.
Yeah.
And it's the exact same story with apparel.
Clothing.
Right. Tariffs on clothing and footwear are currently averaging 36%.
46%. That is over a third of the value of the shoe added as a penalty tax right at the border.
Yes. And what about electronics? I mean, 96% of Americans own a computer of some kind.
You literally cannot function in society in 2026 without one. You can't apply for a job, you can't do your taxes, kids can't do their homework.
Right. And prices on consumer electronics are expected to rise about 18% in the short term, directly due to the new tariffs on imported components. So when you put all this together, coffee, clothes, computers, it completely explains why 46% of people in that sentiment survey are spontaneously complaining about high prices.
Because it isn't just generic inflation where everything floats up a tiny bit across the board.
No, it is highly specific, policy-driven cost increases on unavoidable everyday goods.
It really feels like an invisible tax. You don't get a receipt at the store with a line item that says tariff tax, $36. But the sneakers that used to cost you $100 are now magically $136.
That is exactly what it is. And this reality feeds perfectly into a behavioral economics concept called anchoring, which really helps explain those weird sentiment numbers we started the show with.
Okay, walk me through anchoring. How does that work in our heads?
So before the pandemic, our collective national psychology was securely anchored to an annual inflation rate of, say, 2% or maybe 2.5%.
Right, the pre-2020 normal.
Exactly. Prices always crept up a little bit every year, but it was so slow that it was barely noticeable. If a gallon of milk went up by 10 cents over the course of an entire year, you didn't panic. You probably didn't even notice.
It was just background noise.
Now, After the massive inflation spikes we lived through in the early 2020s, and now these deliberate tariff shocks hitting us in 2026, our expectations as consumers have firmly anchored at a much higher level.
Okay.
Consumers have essentially accepted, grudgingly of course, but they've accepted that we now live in a world where things just get more expensive much faster.
You know, it's like getting a really bad roommate.
A bad roommate.
Yeah. Think about it. At first, when they move in, you are totally shocked by the mess. They leave dishes everywhere, you fight about it constantly, you hold house meetings, you're stressed all the time.
Right, the initial shock.
But after a year of living with them, you just kind of sigh and step over the giant pile of laundry in the hallway. Because that is just your life now. You stop actively fighting the reality every single day, but you are still deeply miserable about the living situation.
That is actually a really perfect analogy. You stop fighting the reality, but the underlying resentment just continues to build. And the current economic data bears this out perfectly.
How so?
Look at the short-term inflation expectations. This is what everyday people think inflation will be 1 year from now. That number recently dropped down to 3.4%.
Okay, so people think it's coming down a bit.
Right, and that is the quote-unquote good news that is driving that slight bump in consumer sentiment we talked about. People are looking around and thinking, okay, the absolute worst of the hyperinflation is over.
But hold on, 3.4% is still way, way higher than the Federal Reserve's actual target rate of 2%.
Exactly, and if you look at long-term expectations, what consumers think inflation will be 5 years from now?
Where is that sitting?
It is stubbornly stuck at 3.3%.
So the American consumer fundamentally does not believe we are ever getting back down to 2% anytime in the near future.
No, they don't. The consumer believes that inflation is sticky now.
Yeah.
And honestly, they are right to believe that.
Because of the tariffs.
Yes, because while certain things like housing services and rent are finally starting to cool down, which helps bring the headline inflation number down a bit, the core physical goods we just talked about, the coffee, the clothes, the tech, those are actively heating up because of the tariffs.
It's the tug of war.
A massive tug of war. The Fed can cool down the housing market by keeping interest rates high, but the Fed cannot cool down the price of a cup of coffee if the government has slapped a 30% tariff on the beans at the border.
Right. Monetary policy can't fix a trade policy bottleneck.
Precisely.
So we have this incredibly complex backdrop right now. We've got sticky inflation, we've got universal tariff pain, and we have a consumer base that is feeling poorer by the day unless they happen to own a ton of NVIDIA stock. Which brings us to the arbiters of our economic fate, the Federal Reserve. They had a major policy meeting in late January. What did they ultimately decide to do?
They voted to pause interest rates. They kept the federal funds rate parked right where it was at 3.50 to 3.75%.
Okay, a pause. Now, usually a pause is pretty standard stuff. It's a wait-and-see approach. But reading the notes from this specific meeting, this wasn't just a quiet, routine pause, was it?
Not at all. This was actually quite dramatic by central bank standards.
Drama at the Fed. I love it.
You have to understand the culture of the Federal Reserve. They put a massive premium on projecting a totally united front to the public. They want the financial markets to think they are all in total agreement, that everything is under control.
Right, consensus is key to stability.
Unanimous votes are the standard operating procedure. But this time, two governors, Steve Mirren and Christopher Waller, actually voted against the pause. They officially dissented.
They dissented. What did they want to do instead?
They wanted a 0.25% rate cut right then and there.
Okay, wait. Is 0.25% really worth breaking ranks over and potentially spooking the global markets?
In the language of central banking, yes. It signals a deep, fundamental ideological battle happening at the very top of the institution.
Wow. Okay, break down the two sides of this battle for us.
Sure. So the majority, which is currently led by Chair Powell, they are looking at that sticky inflation data we just discussed. They see inflation hovering above 3%. They see the tariffs driving up the cost of physical goods.
So they are the hawks.
They are the hawks. They are terrified that if they cut interest rates right now, it will act like pouring gasoline on a fire. Inflation will roar back, and we will repeat the disastrous monetary mistakes of the 1970s.
Right, the start-stop-start inflation cycle. It's their worst nightmare.
Exactly. But then you have the dissenters, Mirren and Waller. What are they looking at?
They're the doves? So I assume they are looking at the jobs data?
You got it. They are looking at the labor market, and they are arguing, look, inflation might be a little sticky, but it's basically stabilizing. The real problem is that the job market is quietly cracking right beneath our feet.
Is it really cracking, though? Because I look at the official headline unemployment number, and it's sitting at 4.4%. That really doesn't sound like a crisis to me. Historically speaking, 4.4% is a pretty healthy labor market.
It isn't a full-blown crisis yet. That's true.
Yeah.
But you can't just look at the headline number. You have to look under the hood at the leading indicators.
Okay, what's under the hood?
The hiring rate is currently incredibly low. Companies might not be firing people in massive headline-grabbing layoff waves yet, but they have absolutely stopped hiring new people. And the quits rate has completely plummeted.
Now, why does the quits rate matter? I would think that people staying in their current jobs is a sign of stability. Isn't that a good thing?
Counterintuitively, no. In a booming, healthy economy, people quit their jobs all the time. Yes. Why do they quit? Because they are highly confident that they can walk across the street, get hired by a competitor, and secure a 10 or 15% raise.
Oh, I see.
A high quit rate is actually a sign of a very dynamic economy where workers feel like they have leverage.
But right now, the quit rate is low.
Very low. People are hunkering down. They are nervous about the future. They are holding on to whatever job they currently have with a death grip because they simply do not see better opportunities out there.
So the lack of movement in the labor market actually suggests widespread fear, not stability.
Exactly. It's paralysis. And 58% of the consumers surveyed in that sentiment poll explicitly stated that they expect unemployment to rise in the coming year.
So the public feels the ice cracking.
They do. And this is the crux of the dissenters' argument. Mirren and Waller are pointing out that monetary policy operates with a massive time lag.
Explain the lag. How long are we talking?
If the Fed decides to cut interest rates today, it takes anywhere from 6 to 12 months for that cheaper money to actually filter its way through the banking system, lower the cost of business loans, and fundamentally encourage a company to start hiring again.
It takes time to thaw the ice.
Exactly.
No.
So Mirren and Waller are basically saying, if we wait to cut rates until the labor market has already visibly collapsed, it's going to be way too late. The damage will be done. We have to cut rates right now to save the jobs of 2027.
You know, it's like trying to steer a massive ocean supertanker.
Yes, exactly.
You have to start turning the wheel miles and miles before you actually want the ship to change direction. If you wait to turn the wheel until you can clearly see the iceberg right in front of you, you've already hit it. It's over.
That is the exact dilemma. And right now, the committee is fiercely arguing over whether they are about to hit an iceberg of inflation or an iceberg of recession.
And they fundamentally don't agree on which iceberg is the bigger threat.
No, they do not.
And just to add fuel to the fire, on top of this massive economic debate, there is a whole layer of political weirdness happening at the Fed right now, isn't there?
Oh, weirdness is a very polite way to put it. There is immense, unprecedented political pressure on the institution right now.
Tell me about the Department of Justice investigation.
Right. You have the DOJ actively investigating Chair Powell over some renovation costs at a Fed facility.
Which just feels highly unusual for a central bank chair.
It is extraordinarily unusual. The Federal Reserve is designed to be an independent entity, free from political pressure. An active DOJ investigation of the chair, especially in an environment that is already this politically charged, it just adds this massive layer of institutional uncertainty to everything they do.
And then there's the succession question.
Right. You have the looming nomination of Kevin Warsh as the potential next chair.
So the financial markets don't just have to try and guess what inflation is going to do. They have to guess about who is actually going to be running the show 6 months from now.
And markets absolutely despise uncertainty. Right now, they are dealing with political uncertainty piled right on top of economic uncertainty. They don't know who will really be calling the shots or what the Fed's actual independence is going to look like in the near future.
Okay, so the Fed is in a standoff. The consumer's in a standoff with prices at the store. But there's actually one specific area of the physical economy that has been going right for the consumer lately.
Yes, gas prices.
Right. I filled up my tank the other day and I braced myself, and I was actually pleasantly surprised.
Nice change of pace.
It is. The national average is sitting around $2.92 a gallon right now.
And for context, that is the lowest national average for this time of year since 2021. It is acting as a huge, vital relief valve for the economy.
Because if it wasn't cheap.
If gas were $4 a gallon right now, combined with where grocery prices and tariffs are, that consumer sentiment number wouldn't be 56. It would probably be in the low 40s. It would be catastrophic.
So why is gas actually cheap right now Is it just a lack of demand because the economy is slowing down?
It's a combination of factors. The primary driver is that U.S. domestic production is extraordinarily high right now.
The whole drill, baby, drill policy approach.
Exactly. Those policies are having a very real, tangible effect on supply. We are essentially flooding the domestic market with oil. And globally, there is also the potential of Venezuelan oil coming fully back online, which adds even more to the global supply pool.
Okay, so that's the bear case for oil prices. That's the argument for why prices might stay low for a while.
Right.
But we call this section of our deep dive the energy wildcard for a very specific reason.
We do. Because there is a bull case,
Yeah.
a very real danger zone that could flip this entirely positive script literally overnight.
Let's walk through the dangers. What's the first risk?
And the first risk is just simple seasonality.
Summer driving.
Right. Gas prices almost always rise as we move into the spring and summer. Refineries have to switch over to their summer blends, which are physically more expensive to manufacture. And people just drive more. They go on road trips.
So the demand naturally goes up.
It does. And if you look at the commodities market, wholesale gas futures are already up 18% from their lows back in January.
So that $2.92 a gallon is highly likely to go up regardless of what happens in the rest of the world.
It will almost certainly cross back over $3 a gallon by Memorial Day, just based on seasonal trends alone.
Okay, but what's the bigger threat? Because seasonality is predictable.
The real scary variable that keeps economists awake at night is geopolitics, specifically the situation with Iran.
Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. We see this mentioned in the news constantly, but I really want to drill down on the actual mechanics of why it matters so much to my wallet.
The tensions in that region are escalating incredibly rapidly. There is open, serious talk in diplomatic and military circles right now about potential U.S. military intervention or targeted blockades.
And for everyone listening who doesn't have a map of the Middle East sitting in front of them right now, explain why the Strait of Hormuz matters. Why is this one specific stretch of water considered the absolute linchpin of the global economy?
Because it is the world's most critical, unavoidable oil choke point. It is incredibly tiny. At its narrowest point, the shipping lanes are literally only 2 miles wide in either direction.
2 miles, that's nothing.
It's a bottleneck. And yet, roughly 1/3 of all seaborne traded oil in the world has to physically flow through that narrow little strip of water.
1/3 of the global seaborne supply.
Yes. If that strait is blocked, or honestly, even if tankers just get too scared to sail through it because of missile threats and commercial shipping insurance premiums suddenly skyrocket, you aren't looking at a normal 10-cent seasonal hike in gas prices.
You're looking at a global supply shock.
An immediate, violent shock. It would act like a massive, instantaneous tax increase on every single consumer and business on the planet simultaneously.
Which would utterly wreck that fragile consumer sentiment we spent the first 20 minutes talking about.
It would vaporize it instantly. And unfortunately, it's not just the Middle East we have to worry about right now. Look at what's happening in Eastern Europe.
Ukraine and Russia, how does that conflict specifically impact the price of gasoline in the U.S.?
Well, the recent Ukrainian drone strikes on Russian oil refineries have been incredibly strategically effective. They have severely degraded Russia's physical ability to refine their crude oil into usable gasoline.
Okay, so they have the raw material, but they can't process it.
Exactly. This has forced Russia to drastically reduce their exports of refined gasoline and just export the raw crude oil instead.
And why does that matter to us?
Because it artificially tightens the global supply of refined gasoline specifically.
So the world might have plenty of raw crude oil sloshing around, but we might not actually have enough global refinery capacity online to turn it into the stuff we actually need to put into our cars.
You hit the nail on the head. We are essentially one bad geopolitical headline away from the only quote-unquote good thing in the physical economy, cheap energy completely disappearing.
That is a terrifying risk. Because remember, as we've already established, the American consumer is already stretched to their absolute limit.
Right.
They can handle $2.90 gas. They can make that work. But can they handle $4.50 gas on top of coffee that costs 34% more and a surprise $1,300 tariff bill on their kids' clothes and school laptops?
No. That feels like the absolute breaking point for the consumer. If energy prices spike, that split screen we've been talking about merges. The illusion breaks, and both sides of the economy just look terrible.
And speaking of potential breaking points, Let's zoom out to the really big picture here. Let's talk about the macro-fiscal health of the country.
We have to. It's the elephant in the room.
We recently got a major outlook report from the budget offices in Washington, and the numbers are, well, they're large.
Large is putting it incredibly mildly. The national debt bomb is ticking louder than it has in generations. The latest projections show that federal debt held by the public is going to hit 101% of our gross domestic product by the end of 2026.
Just to make sure everyone grasps that, we as a nation currently owe more money than our entire economy produces in a given year.
Correct. We are functionally underwater on the national mortgage. And the projected budget deficit for 2026 alone is expected to be $1.9 trillion.
$1.9 trillion in a single year.
That is nearly 6% of our entire GDP, just in deficit spending.
Let's put that in some historical context. Is a $1.9 trillion deficit normal for an economy that is supposedly growing?
In a non-recession year? Absolutely not. It is unprecedented.
Yeah.
Usually the government only deficit spends like that when they are desperately trying to fight off a massive economic collapse.
Right, like the bank bailouts in 2008 or the COVID stimulus checks in 2020.
Exactly. You spend like that during a crisis. But right now, we're running absolute crisis-level deficits while the stock market is simultaneously sitting at a record all-time high and headline unemployment is in the fours.
Which makes no sense.
It is highly pro-cyclical spending, and it is incredibly dangerous from a macroeconomic perspective.
Because this isn't free money. The government has to borrow this money by selling bonds, and they have to pay interest on that debt to the bondholders.
And this is the single statistic from the budget report that should keep every American up at night.
Okay, let's hear it.
Annual interest payments on the national debt are now officially set to surpass our entire national defense spending.
Wait, stop. Say that one more time.
We are now spending more of our tax dollars just to service the interest on our past debt. Not even paying down the principal balance, just paying the interest than we spend on the entire Department of Defense.
That is staggering.
The Army, the Navy, the Air Force, the Marines, the Space Force, the entire global intelligence apparatus. All of it combined costs the taxpayer less than our annual interest payments.
That seems completely mathematically unsustainable. What does that actually mean for our future?
It means that the government has utterly exhausted its fiscal space.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning, if we actually do hit a real recession next year, if the labor market really does crack, like the Fed dissenters fear it will, the government can't easily just pass a new bill to spend $2 trillion to stimulate the economy again.
Because the national credit card is already maxed out just keeping the lights on.
Exactly. We are driving the economic engine at the absolute red line, and we don't have a spare tire in the trunk if we blow out a policy tire.
And what makes this deficit spending even more frustrating is that while the government is spending money like a drunken sailor, the actual productive physical parts of the economy like manufacturing and home building are actively struggling.
Yes. The housing market is practically in a depression right now. If you look at the Builder Sentiment Index.
This is the survey of home building companies.
Right. It measures how optimistic or pessimistic the people who actually build our houses are. The index is currently sitting at 36.
Out of what? What's the scale?
The scale is 0 to 100. Anything under 50 means the industry views current conditions as poor.
So 36 is terrible. Why are they so pessimistic? Is it just because mortgage rates are still high?
High interest rates are a big part of it, yes. It makes it expensive for builders to borrow money for construction loans, and it prices buyers out of the finished homes. But it's also the raw construction costs.
Which brings us right back to the tariffs.
Exactly. It all loops back. We currently have massive tariffs on Canadian lumber. We have tariffs on imported steel. We have tariffs on cabinetry, on plumbing fixtures, on electrical components.
So it literally costs a fortune in taxes just to buy the materials to frame a basic starter home.
Yes. So the builders just aren't building. They can't make the math work.
Which means the housing inventory stays artificially low, which in turn keeps existing home prices artificially high, which keeps inflation sticky.
It is a perfect vicious cycle. It's too expensive to build, and it's too expensive to buy.
And what about manufacturing? Are they getting hit just as hard?
Absolutely. We saw recent regional data out of the Northeast showing that their manufacturing index completely plummeted down to negative 25.7.
Negative 25? That sounds like a free fall.
It is a very sharp contraction. It tells us that in the industrial sectors, things are actively shrinking. Factories are seeing fewer new orders, they are scaling back production hours, and they certainly aren't expanding.
Okay, so let's take a breath and try to synthesize all of these different threads we've pulled today. because it is a lot to take in.
It is a highly complex web right now.
We have a booming stock market that is essentially being single-handedly driven by AI tech hype.
Right.
We have an American consumer who tells pollsters they feel broke, but they are still out there begrudgingly spending money on expensive coffee anyway.
For now, yes.
We have a federal government that is drowning in unprecedented debt. We have the physical manufacturing and housing sectors actively contracting. And we have a Federal Reserve that is totally paralyzed by conflicting data and internal arguments.
That is the complete picture. It is, exactly as we said at the top of the show, a split-screen economy. We are walking a very, very thin economic tightrope right now.
And to make matters worse, the safety net, the ability for the government to step in with fiscal stimulus if we fall off the tightrope, is full of giant holes because of the massive interest payments on the debt.
Exactly. We are completely relying on the consumer to just keep walking that tightrope day after day. As long as they keep their jobs and as long as they feel just wealthy enough from looking at their retirement portfolios, we can probably muddle through this.
But that brings us to the final, really provocative thought I want to leave everyone with today.
Oh, this is the big question.
Because earlier, you mentioned that the entire lift in consumer sentiment, the literal only reason that index number is at 56 and not sitting in the low 40s, is tied to the stock market.
Yes. Specifically, the AI trade, the NVIDIA, the Microsoft, the handful of massive tech giants that are holding up the entire S&P 500.
Right. They're essentially acting like Atlas holding up the economic sky right now.
They really are. And remember, we saw a little wobble in that trade back in mid-February, a brief tech sell-off. And immediately, almost instantly, overall consumer sentiment dipped right alongside it. The psychological correlation is absolutely undeniable.
So the terrifying question we have to ask is, what happens to this entire delicate house of cards if that specific tech trade really falters?
If the AI bubble actually bursts, or honestly, even if it just slowly deflates because the corporate earnings don't quite live up to the astronomical hype,
Right.
if the S&P 500 drops 15 or 20%, suddenly that wealth effect we talked about, it completely evaporates.
And the one thing that was insulating the upper middle class from feeling the painful reality of those grocery prices and those $1,300 tariff bills, it just disappears overnight.
And when that happens, you don't have a split screen anymore.
No.
The screens merge, and you are just left with one unified, incredibly painful economic picture for everyone.
That is the real systemic danger here. We are essentially leveraging our entire national economic confidence on the performance of a very small, highly specific sector of the stock market.
That's a massive gamble.
Yeah.
If that one domino falls, the rest of the board is going to look incredibly shaky very, very quickly.
Well, that is certainly a sobering thought to leave you all with today as you head into your weekend. Definitely check your stock portfolio, but, maybe double check your grocery budget for the month, too.
That is always very good advice in this environment.
Well, that is it for this week's Pro Ticker Deep Dive. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time.